Kristen. Ash, I'd love to start with you. Did you start Infinite Variety Productions? Is that your production company?
Yes, that's my production company.
So I'd love to hear a bit about your background and
Mhm.
understand a bit about how In Their Footsteps came to be.
I started as an actor, and I think there's a lot of stories like this. When I started acting, there were not a lot of stories where the women were in the forefront of the story. And so I wanted to start doing more stories about women, and I've loved history. So I started a theater company that spotlights women's history, and I'm a dramaturg. I love research. So I just started researching a lot of these stories. And IVP was around for a little while, and I had done some other stories that were veteran based. There's a play out there about Operation Babylift, which I was asked to come over and help edit, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'll say this, like I didn't learn very much about the Vietnam War when I was younger. So every time I would get something else, it was a new introduction to something I should have known. So I learned a little bit about Operation Babylift. During Operation Babylift, there's a wonderful veteran, if he's watching, Bob Staneritz, who came up to me and wanted help writing a play about what it's like to lose people. He served in the Vietnam War, and he loves telling a story of he just said, "Who's in charge here?" He came up to a whole group of us and yelled that until I raised my hand, really scared. And then we created a play based on he had a lot of poetry and things called Beyond the Etchings, which just looks at what it's like for families to go to the Vietnam Wall who have lost those who went to war there. And so already my theater company had started to do a lot of veteran based work. And then I was in grad school at Sarah Lawrence for women's history. And I actually had never done any oral histories up until that point. I was taking an oral history class. And when they asked they asked who would I want to interview, I'd gotten to know Anne, who is the sweetest soul. And I thought for someone who could help me kind of break my way into oral history, that Anne would be the right one to reach out to. And at that point, so IVP started in 2011. We got a not for profit status in 2014. And this was about 2017. So we'd already done a whole lot of, plays that were already published, working with different playwrights, but we really wanted to start to write our own plays. So it was the perfect time that I interviewed Anne. And let's just say no one does their first interviews very well, because I interviewed Anne twice, and it is her second interview that actually became part of that play, because I think there was oh, that's what Zoom's going to do, mine all the time. And so I was able, and luckily enough, in my grad school gave me a grant to then put these oral histories together. And from there, I'm sure you have other questions, but that's kind of how I kind of started my journey into In Their Footsteps, was just, oh, you need me to do oral histories. And I absolutely loved it. So yeah, these are the five women I ended up. So I reached out to Anne, who then told me to reach out to Judy Jenkins Godino, who is an absolute dear, who is in recreation. And my friend Petal at the time knew Lucky, if everyone knows Doris Lucky Allen, who unfortunately passed away last June at the age of 97. And Lucky lived in Oakland, California. So we flew out to Oakland. And if anyone knows Lucky, she greeted us there. She showed us her entire world for that interview. And then she recommended we reach out to Lily. And I actually think, Sam, you were my last. Well, I think you were in Connecticut at that point. And it's, what they call the snowball effect when it comes to interviewing. Snowball effect means you ask one person and they know another person, they know another person. So it didn't take very long for me to get to interview these five wonderful people and their experiences. And I was just, again, it was just who recommended who that made me pick what ended up being two who were veteran military and three civilian employees.
And this was your first play, first documentary theater play that you wrote?
Yeah, so this is my first one I'd ever written. And again, my first oral histories. And from there, I love oral history, and I do a lot of interviewing. And I absolutely think it's a beautiful way because, it's just from that person's memory. So it's not like we're saying that this is exactly what happened. This is one person's experience that you get to walk through. And that's actually what I really love about oral history drama, is that You're just helping people walk through this kind of stuff. And I think my training as an actor, which is very, you have to imagine the circumstances and put yourself into the circumstances, really helped me with interviewing. Because when you're interviewing someone, you want to be able to help guide them into this memory that they have. So yeah, this ended up being the first thing I've ever written. And I'm not one to take breaks. So I think I finished my last interview in 2017 in the spring. And that summer, we rented space at NYU and we continued to work on the script. And it's the exact words. So it is edited the way it is. But it's everyone's exact words, just kind of copy and pasted into conversation because we thought it was really important, or I thought it was really important for people to know that these are the actual words that these women spoke to me during the interview. And every interview was very different. It showed the personality of every single woman that I interviewed here.
That was going to be one of my questions because you can create a drama by having, one actress comes up, does a 20-minute monologue, and then the next and the next and the next. But taking these interviews and then editing them into conversation, that must have been quite challenging.
It actually wasn't as much as one would think. So first, I mean, there were common themes that I was really, because again, I didn't want this to be about the war. I wanted it to be about the women. So I asked them what they did on their time off. And, so even if everyone had very different things and I can say, Anne went to the laundromat. One of my favorite scenes is when she talks about going to the laundromat and just listening and to the sound of the laundry.
Let
Lily,
me just interject there.
Yes,
go
for it.
For the Vietnam vets who are like, their jaws are dropping. The laundromat was the nurses' headquarters at Cameron Army, and they had a trailer with 2 washing machines and 2 dryers in it. It was probably the only self-service laundry operation on all of Cameron Peninsula, but I found it and I used it.
Imagine like high school kids who are learning about the Vietnam War and they're like, wait, like this is the things I was excited for them to know. That's what that's one of the stories Anne has. And because I think there's too many of the movies that show just like the events, the politics, but there's the other moments where, this is the moment that Anne talked about. And then I would ask other people what they did on their time off. So I was able to kind of create these conversations through common themes. And then when there wasn't common themes and people disagreed, I would just have those conversations together. And even when there were moments where people perhaps didn't want to talk about something, I allowed there to be silence on stage. So I really feel like with this kind of things, if you just hopefully, and it's always my biggest fear to not honor the stories that I was given, especially in something as subject matter as important as this, if you honor what they said and you just show it on stage, it all comes together. So the hardest part was not putting things together. It was, how do I decide what can be included? Because my interviews are about 3.5 hours long. So that was the hardest part.
Yeah, as a theater guy myself, the silence in a show can speak volumes. There's so many, there's such that rhythm of a play where you get into the dialogue, and then when a moment of silence can happen, boy, it can floor the entire audience. Boy, and now I have so many thoughts in my head that it's hard to like get them all together. Was it surprising to you as you started into the interview process that it wasn't going to be military veterans that were in Vietnam, that there were actually civilians there as well?
Well, I think it's because I actually started with Anne and Judy as my first introductions. So I was one of the few who knew a little bit more about the civilian planes, but I don't think I had any idea what it meant until I did the interview about what it meant for veteran benefits, what it meant because obviously when there was the interview happened, for Lily, who was a military nurse, she talked about not feeling as much perhaps as she was a veteran. She volunteered and just the many thoughts that came up. So then when I learned more about the civilian employees, I think I knew about them, but it wasn't until I did the interviews and learned more that I was really shocked, especially, again, we talk a little bit, Ann and I, about Agent Orange and other such things that really affected the civilian employees. And they have a much different, everyone has a hard experience with it. But again, when it comes to testing and stuff like that. So I think that was what kind of opened my eyes to the civilian employees. And then for Donut Dollies and Red Cross, when I started to learn where I did not know, did not know what a donut dolly is, which is in the script, which is like, people are like, what's a donut dolly? And not really understanding exactly what that job description meant, and just the importance and how hard that job was in the middle, especially of Vietnam.
What was it about? I know having a theater
Yeah,
background, obviously, this was going to be a play, but what was it about this becoming a play that would be more powerful than it being a film or a biography?
I mean, I'm just a theater person, so I can always say that I think that it should be a theater piece. But I especially wanted this to be, I think there's something about being in the room together and having the experience with the audience that I think is really important for something like this. And there's a lot of breaking the fourth wall. And so, especially for a younger generation that doesn't know very much about this history, or I find a lot of times they're reading it in history books and they're not really connecting to it. I find it's really important for this play to be there for them to see a character talk about it. And then I love talkbacks, and we've been really lucky. Like, there's nothing, I will say, I don't think, I mean, the play is very powerful, but then when you're done with the play and then Ann Kelsey stands up and you're like, wait, that's an actual person that I just learned about all of this. I think it makes the history a lot more real. And I think that that's why it's really important for this to be done in person.